We will be talking today about human subjects research and the Institutional Review Board. And let me just get started here. Things that we're going to talk about today are going to have a little bit of history about the regulations and how we got to where we are today. And part of that is the Belmont principles. There are 3 of the Belmont principles. We'll talk about those, we'll name those, and then we'll make a direct link between those principles and what it is that we ask you to do, the IRB process and all of that stuff. Then we'll also identify common errors. When we go out, we do post-monitoring checks of studies that have been approved and are going on. And we just kind of look at the process and how they're doing things, and we see common things. And so what we'll do is talk about today a little bit of ways that which you can prevent yourself from falling into some of those errors. So first, let's talk about the Institutional Review Board. So the Institutional Review Board is a university-wide standing committee. And when we say it's university-wide and it's a standing committee, it does not report to anybody. It does not report to the Office of Research. It doesn't report to any dean or even the university president or UT system. They are freestanding completely. That's so that they can objectively look at research studies and make determinations about how to best protect human participants. And that's really why they are here, is to look at each individual study and how it's designed, who they're going to bring in as participants, and just make sure that everything has been thought of and that those human participants will not have any harm come to them, or the chances of that are significantly low. So the Institutional Review Board reviews all research activities with human subjects that are affiliated with the institution. Doesn't matter your title or your role at the university. If you are a student, if you are a tenure-track faculty member, if you were the president of the institution, Dr. Benson wanted to do a research project, he would have to come through the Institutional Review Board if he was enrolling human participants. And when we're talking about human participant data, what is a human participant? It actually is any time that you're going to use data or collect data from an individual, a human being. You're collecting it, through interventions, you're collecting it face-to-face interviews, that type of thing. You're going to use it for research, or you are looking at data that has already been collected. And you just want to analyze this data that was collected from human beings. And that can be, a lot of times it's collected for a reason that is not related to research, and now you want to use it for research. So that could be police records or medical data, that type of thing. That is still considered human subjects research, as well as samples, tissue samples that might have been donated or collected through surgery, and instead of being disposed of, they're now used for research. That is human subjects research, is what we're talking about. So if there is somebody from the institution that is affiliated with UT Dallas and they want to do research with data that's either collected directly or a secondary collection, they want to analyze that, they want to work with that, they have to come through the Institutional Review Board. So it doesn't matter where this research is taking place. It could be taking place within UT Dallas on our campus. If the investigators are using the garage, they are not on campus at all. They're not using university facilities. They're still connected to the institution. That keyword is they're affiliated with UT Dallas. So they're going to have to come through us. It doesn't matter if they are, if an investigator is working with another institution. A lot of our studies, we collaborate with UT Southwestern. We're still going to want to have record of that study, whether or not we actually review it as the IRB of record, or whether we give up that authority and rely on UT Southwestern's IRB. We're still going to want to have some sort of record of that because you are affiliated with us. So we're going to want to have knowledge of that and record of that and kind of make that determination with your collaborating institution, how we're going to handle this and how the IRB review is going to be handled. And funded or not funded, doesn't really matter. We apply the regulations the same to all human subjects research going on. So when you're talking about the Institutional Review Board, it is different from the IRB Administrative Office. They're two separate components. The IRB administrators, they really serve as the interface between the IRB reviewers, the individuals on the committee who are actually looking at the research study and making those determinations. The administrators are that interface between the investigator and the reviewers. And so the administrators, as administrators, we know those regulations in and out. We know what our IRB reviewers are, what they tend to look at, how they are looking at the regulations and how they're looking at the study and what they want to see. And so we can help do that pre-review. We can help get that application so that it has already addressed a lot of the little things that the reviewers sometimes get caught up with and that type of thing. So hopefully we can help move that process faster so that there's going to be less things for them to look at and get distracted by with that. We also provide educational opportunity for UTD researchers, just like this one today. We also are happy to, if we're happy to come out to labs, to your lab space. If you are doing human subjects research, you want to have a refresher for your folks in your lab, we'll come out to your lab and we'll talk on any topic that you'd like us to talk about. We are happy to do just a one-on-one training or, schedule a WebEx like we're doing today with individuals in your lab or whomever you think would benefit from. We are here to help you prepare for an outside audit. So we do post-monitoring checks, and that we really don't call that as an audit. We don't consider that to be an audit. We're really just looking at your practices and looking at what you're doing really, really well. And, maybe I'm going to remember that what you're doing when I go to another lab, maybe they're struggling in an area that you're really strong in. So I'm going to take some of the ideas and offer it to this new lab. Or if I come out and I do a post monitoring and I see that a lab is really struggling in one area, I can offer suggestions to just make sure that they have the tools that they need to stay in compliance, both with university policy and with the federal regulations. And yeah, we're just really aware of those policies and regulations. We live them 24/7. So if investigators have any questions, they can just reach out to us at any. So let's talk about the Belmont principles for a little bit. We didn't always have rules and regulations on human subjects research. And back before the regulations, like the regulations kicked in the 1980s. And so, or the late 1980s, I believe. And so before that, investigators were just trusted to act in ethical ways. And sometimes lines got blurred and there was some gray area and they didn't have the objectivity that they maybe could have had. And then there were some people that just were doing stuff. The one thing, if you look back in the history of human subjects research, there are a lot of examples that you can point to say, this was some really crazy stuff that was going on, or people really got hurt from this type of research. The one that really kicked off the regulations in the United States, though, was the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. It started in 1932. It was a government-funded study, and it lasted to 1972. And I'm not going to go into a lot of the details, but if you're not familiar with it, I do recommend that you kind of get familiar with that because it is just a stark example of what can go wrong with human subjects research. So the government, this really hit the fan with a whistleblower in 1972. The government said, we cannot allow this to continue. We cannot allow subjects of human research to be harmed in the fashion that they are being harmed. And so we need to have rules that apply across the board. And so the government came up with, I think they had a commission that came up with guidelines, and that was the Belmont Report. The Belmont Report had 3 principles, just what's needed to be considered to make sure that human subjects are protected. The first of those 3 principles, and we'll talk about each, is respect for persons. It's just a good idea in general to respect people. But in the world of research, that means that participants are their own individual. And so there's nobody on the face of the planet that knows better and can make the decision for that participant whether or not they should enroll in a study. The person that can do that is that participant. And so if they are told the truth, if they are told in a way that they can understand in language that makes sense to them, and if they're shown that respect, allow them to make that determination on their own. There are some individuals who might have a diminished ability to make determinations on their own. And so in the regulations, they have built in special protections. And that would be for children, for prisoners, for pregnant individuals, if the research itself might affect the pregnancy itself, may affect the fetus, and mentally incapacitated individuals as well. There are just extra protections in place, extra steps that need to be taken just to make sure that the risks have been mitigated and that respect is really there in place. So this respect, a lot of times when we're thinking about, okay, I'm telling them the truth, I'm telling them in words that they understand, a lot of times we understand that that is the informed consent process. When you give them that informed consent form and you talk about it, and they sign it. It also is even before that, before you even meet the participant. We're talking about the recruitment. How is that recruitment language and how is it being sold to, presented, I should say? How is it being presented to participants? Don't want to be misleading, even if it's just unintentionally. And respect also lasts long after that participant has left your lab. If you're still analyzing that data, it's important to remember that there are people behind those data. And so the way that you store it and the way that you keep it confidential is a way that you can uphold this principle of respect for persons. We talked about the informed consent process being part of this. And it's really important to give the participants time so that they don't feel pressured to sign or, they just don't feel pressured. They have time to think about the study, think about what they're going to be asked to do, to think about the ramifications and the risks, if there are risks involved. And depending on the risks involved and the level of that, depending on that is how much time would they need? Is it the type of study, are they asked to do things that maybe they would want to talk about with a loved one to kind of bounce ideas off and see if it's really something that they would want to do? Or is it a survey about, their experience with X, Y, or Z that it doesn't really, even if it was known to the general public, it wouldn't put them at harm? There's just different ranges for how much time is appropriate. So it's important that you know your study and your participants to know what might be the most appropriate timeframes to give people. You want to make sure that they feel free to ask questions. And so you want to be available to them and so that they can ask those questions. You don't want to make them feel like you don't want them to feel stupid for asking questions or that type of thing. They should have that ability to ask those questions. It's important to know that informed consent is a process. It's not just a one step, they've signed the form, we're done, let's go. It is a continual process, continual checking in, important to read body language and just anticipate. You can see that maybe they're starting to get a little bored, or maybe they're uncomfortable with what I'm asking them to do, or a little unsure. Or maybe it's like, well, I'm not sure if they understand this particular point. Let's go over it again. Make sure they're still okay. So they should really feel like and have that knowledge that they can walk out the door at any time they want. They can stop participating. It just gets too uncomfortable for them. They want to get up and they want to leave, and that's okay, and they should understand that. Environment is essential. When you're thinking about where you're going to conduct your informed consent, it's really good to have just a one-on-one session with that participant, or if it's a group participant, like a husband and wife, maybe just the two of them with the investigator, to allow for them to feel comfortable to ask those questions. If it was in a hallway, a busy hallway, they might not feel comfortable. Or if they were working with a teenager and doing the assent with the teenager, maybe you don't want to do it with the parent in the room. It just depends on the type of study that's going on. So you want to anticipate what might cause a participant to be uncomfortable and kind of plan for that. Not only do you need to let them ask those questions and be available for that, you need to be ready for the types of questions that might come in. So it's a really good idea to practice the informed consent process with people in your lab and just prepare for the types of questions that might come in about the study, about, that type of thing as you're going through the informed consent process. And just be observant. It's really important to just be cognizant and know if somebody looks like they don't understand, and just draw them out and help them. It's really important to use the most recent IRB approved version of that consent form. When we go out and we do post monitoring, this is one of the areas that investigators kind of slip up on. We want to make sure, even if so right now what we do is we stamp consent forms at the bottom. So you want to look at that stamp and make sure that that is the most recent version. We no longer put expiration dates on consent forms, so it just has an approval date. And as long as there is no consent form that was approved after that, you're good. It's important that even if you are changing, a word or, something that seems minor, it's really important to make sure that you're using that most updated one. We want all participants to have the same information that as the others during that time frame. So this cartoon just illustrates a participant who is not comfortable. So it's important to see the environment. Lighting is important. The room is important. Who's in the room is important. It's all of this stuff. You don't want a participant to feel pressured into it to participate. So the more things that we see when we go out and do post-monitoring checks, common things are signatures and dates are not done correctly, properly, and it's very, very important. The signature and the date is essential. This is your green light to go forward with the experiment. A participant has signed this. They are good to go. Let's do this. And it's your documentation. So if anything comes up, you can just pull out that informed consent form. You've got one for every single participant. And when we go out, we see most always we see that the participant has signed the form, which is great. But the investigator is also supposed to sign that informed consent form as well. And a lot of times we don't see the investigator who went through the process with them sign it. Sometimes the investigator does sign, but they don't date. Sometimes they sign and date it, but the date that they give is different from the participant's date. We want, if you have children, the child signs the assent form. The date is before the parent signed and dated the form, which is different from the investigator signing and dating the form. So it's just really important that you keep that in mind, that both the participant needs to sign The investigator needs to sign. And if there's any oddities or discrepancies, because I don't know what day of the week it is, let alone the day of the month. So it's a common mistake. I'm sure that it could happen, but let's just document what went wrong so that if somebody came in, did a post monitoring or came in and did an audit, you could say, oh yeah, I not only am I aware of that, but this is why. And if there is a discrepancy in the date and you catch it right there, just have the participant, if they're the ones that did the incorrect date, just have them kind of cross it out, write the correct date and initial right there. So you have all of that documented and it's really clear to whoever's looking at your records. So here's another fun cartoon. Give you a minute to look at that. So when we're talking about informed consent and recruitment information, it's really important that, and this is one of the things that the IRB is going to be looking at when we're looking at both the recruitment, the scripts, the flyers, all of that stuff, and then the design of the study. How is it designed? We want to make sure that there's nothing in the study that's going to make participants kind of not think about the risks or not care about the risks because of what they feel like they're going to get out of the study, whether that be some sort of compensation, whether that be some other reason that they, maybe their boss is the principal investigator. So they feel like this is really in their best interest to participate, whether they want to or not, or even the best interest to participate without even thinking about those risks. So there's a whole lot of things. We call that undue influence. It's really important both to know who your participant is individually to see if there are some sort of conflicts there, but also your population that you're looking at. Different populations have different things that can cause that undue influence. When you're talking about a prisoner in jail, a Snickers bar is enough to cause that undue influence. Seems really small to us in mainstream society, but to somebody who is locked up in an institution, in a penitentiary, that could be huge. So it's just really important to be cognizant of what it is that you're offering and the people who will be your participants so that you kind of plan for that and knock out all of the undue influence. Back to the informed consent. The regulations say that a copy of the consent form shall be given to all participants. Now, we understand that there are a lot of studies that the participant really does not want a copy. And the reason that we give the copies of the consent form is so that they can look at that at any time that they want to. Questions, they have a contact. They have both the IRB office and they have the investigators involved. And so that's really there for them, for their records, for their reference. And there are just some studies, some participants that don't want that. And that's their right. You should not force it upon them. However, if they say, I don't want this, you need a way in your lab to document that you offered it and they said no. So I can come to your lab and do a post monitoring and say, did everybody get a copy? And you can say confidently, no, participant 5, 7, and 43 did not want one, and we documented it here. And you can show that, and it's very clear. You tried, they didn't want it, and that's fine. The IRB consent forms should have the original signatures. So if you wanted to make copies of those and give a copy to the participant, that's completely fine. But the original needs to stay in the lab if it is a physical signature. If you're doing everything online, that's different. But if it is a physical signature, pen and paper, you're going to want to keep that original signature in your lab. Nothing should be added to that consent form. Go out and do post monitoring, and you would not believe how many handwritten notes and changes I have seen on consent forms, whether that's marking out dollar amounts, oh, it was approved by the IRB, I'm just going to use an old form and mark it out and write it. Please don't do that. You have just put your study out of compliance. So don't handwrite notes, don't make changes on the form, don't write people's contact information, email addresses, dates of birth, don't write notes to other investigators. This participant was 30 minutes late and didn't complete XYZ. Don't do that. Find another way to document and store that information. You also don't want to put an participant's coded ID code on the top. So if Amanda Boone was participant 74, don't put 74 on my signed consent form with my identity on it, because that is a direct link between the consent form and who I am and the data that I just gave you. So the second principle in the Belmont Principles is beneficence. And it's just do no harm. It's what we hear and associate a lot with the medical profession. Don't harm people. You just want to make sure that the risks in your study are minimized as much as possible, and the benefits to either an individual or to society are greater. If you're filling out an IRB application and it asks for the benefits and you say there are none, either to the participant or to society, then the IRB is going to say, why are you doing this? Why are you putting people through this? So we really are looking at the risks and we are looking at the benefits as well. And it's okay if there's no benefit to the individual participant. That's okay, and that's actually really common. And investigators really need, when they're doing their application, I know in your head as an investigator, you know your study, you know what you're asking people to do, and you know your population. You need to be able to put that on paper in the application, how you are going to recognize those risks. Yes, I'm aware of the risks. I know how to recognize those, and I have a plan in place to mitigate that. So it won't, if it does happen, the likelihood that it will happen is really, really, really slim. But if it does happen, this is my plan. The risk should be reduced to just what's necessary to accomplish your goal for the research. So if you need some data points and you ask for the social security number, is there some other data point or something else that can get you what you need that is not a social security number? That's a way to mitigate risk right there. I will tell you, I've never seen a study where we're okay with labs having social security numbers right there. If they do, no, I don't know of a study at the UTD where that is the case. So you just want to think about those types of things. How do you mitigate those risks? You want to think about your vulnerable populations. I want to include people who have cognitive impairments. Why do you need to involve these individuals? You're targeting them. It's not, hey, I don't know that they're cognitively impaired and they enroll in the study. It's I'm targeting a person who is cognitively impaired. Can you justify that based on the science? This is why this makes sense for me to enroll this particular group of individuals. And that includes UTD students. It's really something that the IRB holds really close to their heart is the UTD students. So we're really looking out for them, and we want to make sure that they are not just accessed just because they're there. We want to make sure that there is a reason that they are involved in a study. It's important to know that there are different types of risk. It's not just the physical risk of running on a treadmill and you fall and ding your knee. It is also psychological. I give information, about myself to a research study, and I trust the researcher with that. But now it is leaked and it was hacked, and now it's on Facebook, and I am so embarrassed. And this is all because I was in your study. So there's the psychological, the social of being maybe shunned from your church, or the PTA group. or economic as well. Maybe this gets out and my insurance is no longer going to cover me, or I cannot get a job because this is known about me and this is on social media and everybody knows it now. So it's really important to think not only of the physical, but also the risks, these other three types: the social, the psychological, and the economic. We talk about data security. That's a really key way to make sure that you're protecting the privacy. So when talking about, there is a difference, confidentiality and privacy. The difference is that the confidentiality really refers to the data. So I'm keeping the data safe and secure. It's confidential. And that directly is linked to a person's privacy. So if you keep that data confidential, then a person's privacy is protected. So the privacy is associated with the participant and the confidentiality to the data itself. So you really want to make sure that you're storing it in a way that is secure, that's going to make the data is so that it's secure and it's only going to be accessed by people who need to see it and people who have been approved by the IRB itself. There's no way that somebody can hack into that, come across it accidentally. You're not storing it if it's a physical file. You're not storing it in a box in the corner of your lab. And that sounds ridiculous, but I have seen that on more than one occasion. So it's really important to think about where you're going to store all this data and how it's going to be accessed and who's going to be accessing it as well. If you need to send it to collaborators at MIT, how are you going to do that and make sure that it is actually secure? And do you only have data that you need? If somebody sends you medical records, you don't need that. Don't keep it in your lab. Signed consent forms should never be placed in a file with other identifying information. So what we say, what we recommend is that the consent form, it's signed. That's a link to the study itself. You store that in one, and you store that in one place and keep that secure. You have maybe I had to do a questionnaire with, or maybe you need my name and my contact information. That's going to be stored somewhere else. And then you had a questionnaire where you needed some of my medical background. You've coded the data, and so it doesn't have my name on it, my contact information, or anything else. Those three sets of documents need to be stored completely separate. And they could be in the same room. It just would need to be under a different lock. If you're keeping them electronically, maybe that would be under different passwords, that type of thing. But you want to make sure that it is secure in how it is stored, and just know that if you keep the code, a spreadsheet with the codes and people's identity in one place, and it's really easy to then access the questionnaire with my code on it and then figure out that I have asthma or, whatever. Um, that's a way that can cause harm. So the third and the very last Belmont principle is justice. And when we're talking about justice, you just want to make sure that the risks and the benefits, if there are any associated with the study, we're talking about risks, there should be some benefits, but that they're just equally distributed through society. So there's equal access to both the risks and the benefits of a study. When we're looking at this, the syphilis study, one of the key things was that they really targeted one group of individuals. They targeted low-income individuals who did not have access to medical care. They did not have access to education. They did not even have access to the information that, there were medical things that could be done to help them with the syphilis, and they didn't have to be in the study. But they really targeted one specific group. And so what they should have done is, well, they shouldn't have run the study, but if you're having a study, what you really need to do is include everybody. Make sure that everybody has an opportunity who wants to enroll can enroll. And if you are excluding people from that study, You need to be able to justify that in the science. So if you want to say, I don't want to have women who are 5'2" enroll in the study. That's okay as long as you can justify it scientifically. Why it does not make sense for you to collect that data for this particular study. And the words matter when you're excluding people. You want to look at that justification. You can't just say they won't benefit from this. How can you justify that scientifically? Make sure that when you present that to the institution review board, it just makes sense for your study. Let's talk about next steps. How do you start? Please contact us at any time. If you have any questions about human subjects research, even if you feel like it's a silly question, it's not. We have heard everything, and we are happy to answer any questions that you have. There's no question that's a silly question at all. So in our office currently, I am the director. We also have Tiffany Jance Fox, Mary Beth Goodnight, and Yesenia Mendez, and they are our specialists. And if you're not sure who to contact, you can always just contact IRB at utdallas.edu, and that's going to all of us. We will all answer that. But it's really important that you contact us before you start any of your research activities, even the recruitment. That is all covered under your IRB. If you start recruiting people for a study, you don't have IRB approval, you're going to have to throw away, you're going to have to start over. You're not going to be able to use anything that you've collected or any participants that were enrolled. You're going to have to start fresh. So when you're looking at the application, you want to put as many details as possible. We understand that the investigators know everything about their study in their head. It's just important to put that down. If somebody can ask, if you're going to say, hey, I'm going to recruit through email, how are you going to get email addresses? Who are you going to send them out to? How are you going to do that? Who's going to be sending that out? At what time? What is in those emails? I mean, there's a whole lot of things that you're going to want to include in that application. Want to know that you've thought of everything and that you have a plan in place for all of it. We want to know where that data is stored, how it's accessed, how it's transferred, both electronic and hard copy. Don't forget about the hard copy stuff as well as the electronic. We're going to want to know how you're going to interact. So even if you're going down to the student union, and whenever we're able to do so, and you just want to face-to-face talk to students and enroll them in the study. Hey, do you want to be part of my study? We're going to want a script of that, and it doesn't have to be verbatim. I'm a robot reading this off of a page, but at least an idea. Give the IRB a sense of what information you're going to give them and how that conversation is envisioned to go. The same with the email. We're going to want a copy of that, recruitment, and all of this stuff, those scripts. We're going to want to know your procedures. If you're giving surveys or measures, we'd like a copy of that just for our records. And then, of course, the consent. How are you doing this? Where is it going to take place? Who's going to be doing it? This type of thing. If you need to have sensitive data, vulnerable population enrollment, we're just going to want to have a justification for that. Just something that makes sense. We're not trying to jam anybody up. We just want to say, oh, yeah, that's really logical. And most of the time it really is. And if there is something that seems sensitive and the IRB is like, well, I don't know, why don't we try this? Would this get you the information that you need just as well as what you asked for? Kind of, we try and find the best way to get the investigators to be able to complete what it is that they want to complete. It's really important to know the role of the principal investigator or the faculty sponsor. So at UT Dallas, we allow students to be principal investigators as long as they have a faculty sponsor on that as well. on the study as well. And it's important to know that the principal investigator and that faculty sponsor are ultimately responsible for ensuring compliance. So if anything goes wrong in the study, that investigator is the one that's responsible for that. Even if it's an RA in the lab or an undergraduate student who you allowed access to data, was able to get in and use data. If they do something that goes against the lab policies, principal investigator is still responsible for that. It's really important that the principal investigator, the faculty sponsor, not only just at when the study first starts up, let the check in with the students or anybody working on it, and these are the rules. This is how you're supposed to conduct yourself. But check in and make sure that you're aware of who's working on what and what's going on. I can't tell you how many times where I've done a post monitoring, or I've had a faculty member or a PI call me up and just in panic. They found out that a graduate student or somebody working in their lab took signed consent forms home, and they lost 50 consent forms. That student is now gone and they don't know where they are. And so you have that situation. The PI is kind of jammed up for that. So it's really important that you know what's going on and that your students know. So I think that's the end of my presentation.